North Korea strongly criticized Tuesday the United Nations Security Council's decision to impose tough new sanctions against the East Asian nation and warned the United States it would experience the greatest pain for playing a leading role in the effort.
The United Kingdom responded to the international measures. The regime had some stern words of warning for the United States, which drafted the resolution. At a UN disarmament conference in Geneva, North Korean Ambassador Han Dae-sung said Pyongyang rejects the latest, quote, illegal and unlawful UNSC resolutions in the strongest terms.
North Korean Ambassador Han Tae-sung at a UN-sponsored disarmament conference in Geneva said his delegation condemns in the strongest terms and categorically rejects the latest illegal and unlawful UN Security Council resolution. Han, without elaborating, said North Korea is poised to use, quote, a form of ultimate means.
He added the U.S. is obsessed with the wild game of reversing the communist state's development of nuclear force, which has already reached completion phase, and that Washington is fired up for political, economic, and military cooperation. Han emphasized the regime is ready to use a form of ultimate means and that the forthcoming measures will make America suffer the greatest pain it has ever experienced in its history.
North Korea had warned before the latest sanctions were imposed that the United States would pay due price if it pushed for stronger sanctions. U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters at the White House Tuesday the new sanctions are just another very small step and nothing compared to what will ultimately have to happen regarding North Korea.
And we find that to be very important. We had a vote yesterday on sanctions. We think it's just another very small step. Not a big deal. Rex and I were just discussing. Not big, I don't know if it has any impact, but certainly it was nice to get a 15-0 vote. But those sanctions are nothing compared to what ultimately will have to happen.
The new round of economic sanctions against North Korea were in response to its September 3rd nuclear test of a possible hydrogen bomb. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley addressed the Security Council late Monday.
Today we are saying the world will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. And today the Security Council is saying that if the North Korean regime does not halt its nuclear program, we will act to stop it ourselves.
If fully implemented, the new sanctions would significantly reduce North Korean access to international currency and fuel needed for its banned ballistic missile and nuclear programs by cutting a third of North Korea's oil imports, which Haley called the lifeblood of its efforts to build and deliver a nuclear weapon, by reducing by more than half the country's gas, diesel, and heavy fuel oil imports, while completely banning the import of natural gas and other oil substitutes. Banning North Korea's textile exports, currently its second most lucrative industry, which Haley said would cost Pyongyang almost $800 million a year. Prohibiting any country from authorizing new work permits for North Korean workers, another key source of hard currency for the Pyongyang regime. Haley said the purpose of the increasing sanctions is to convince the Kim government to end its threatening nuclear missile development program in exchange for sanctions relief, economic aid, and security guarantees.
We are not looking for war. The North Korean regime has not yet passed the point of no return. If it agrees to stop its nuclear program, it can reclaim its future. If it proves it can live in peace, the world will live in peace with it.
South Korea's presidential office said that the new UN sanctions send a united message that the international community will never accept a North Korea as a nuclear state. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also welcomed the resolution and said Tokyo would continue to work closely with the international community to change Pyongyang's policies.
During Tuesday's cabinet meeting at Seoul Government Complex, Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun said it was a relief that the international community unanimously agreed to slap tougher sanctions on North Korea.
It's not as strong as the initial draft proposed by the U.S., not a complete ban on oil sales, but reducing 30% of the oil provided to North Korea and taking up the first asset freeze on Kim Jong-un's regime.
Prime Minister Lee elaborated that the UN resolution would not have happened if not for the strong relationship that has developed between the U.S. and Chinese presidents. He also called on government ministries to take into account the ninth package of measures imposed by the UN Security Council on Pyongyang. Concerning the recent calls for Seoul to consider nuclear armament, Prime Minister Lee ruled out any such possibilities.
Although there are suggestions for South Korea's nuclear armament or redeploying tactical nukes, the reality is that the government's ultimate goal is sticking to the denuclearization principle.
Washington had also shown signs of an apparent policy shift, as the Trump administration proposed the option of Seoul redeploying tactical nukes to cope with growing threats from North Korea. However, the South Korean government reiterated that its principle for a nuclear-free peninsula remains unchanged and that it has never considered redeploying U.S. tactical nukes.
The United States had sought much stronger sanctions, including a complete oil embargo, an asset freeze on leader Kim Jong-un, and authorization to use military force if necessary to interdict ships suspected of smuggling banned items. But China and Russia, which both hold veto power in the Security Council, would only agree to a compromise version enacted, and both expressed their determination to see a return to dialogue to resolve the issue. Many advocates for the Trump administration's maximum pressure strategy to coerce the leadership in Pyongyang to give up its nuclear program say this latest round of sanctions is still not strong enough.
Only time will tell how effective the new sanctions will be in curbing the regime's nuclear ambitions. In the long run, they could deal an effective blow. But most North Korean watchers say the measures are ultimately not enough. Connie Kim has the analysis.
The UN Security Council has adopted its 9th sanctions resolution on North Korea, being dubbed the strongest to date. But whether these punitive measures will be effective in curbing the regime's nuclear ambitions is up in the air. This comes as members of the UN Security Council failed to agree on the initial draft of a complete oil embargo. Instead, imports of both refined and crude oil will be capped at 8.5 million barrels a year. While it may be limited in terms of scale, experts say an oil cap on the north is a good starting point in maximizing pressure on the reclusive state.
For a poor country like North Korea, which is heavily dependent on the outside for oil, which is mostly used for transportation purposes, the new measures will represent a reduction of only 25% compared to the previous amount, but still it's going to make an impact in my view.
This resolution has significance as it started slapping sanctions on its energy. It also sends a signal that the North's crude oil supplies could be cut even more on the heels of additional nuclear and missile tests.
Paired with other sanctions, namely a ban on North Korea's textile exports and a ban on renewing North Korean laborers' overseas contracts, these measures are expected to deprive the regime from nearly $1 billion in annual revenues. Nonetheless, most North Korea watchers in Seoul raise skepticism over whether the set of sanctions will be enough in preventing the regime's further provocations. They forecast Pyongyang will push ahead with its goal of developing an intercontinental ballistic missile, topped with a nuclear warhead capable of reaching the U.S., while Washington will continue to compel North Korea to discuss denuclearization.
Regional security analyst Grant Newsham is with the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies in Tokyo.
It's really not comprehensive enough or serious enough, it's really just cutting enough to cause the North Koreans any huge problems as I see it. But it does allow the Trump administration to say that at least it tried.
If this UN resolution fails to deter the Kim government, Newsham said the United States would be justified to pursue secondary sanctions against Chinese banks and entities that do business with North Korea. However, on Tuesday, some of China's major state-owned banks reportedly stopped providing financial services to new North Korean clients, in what could be a sign of increased sanctions enforcement to prevent any U.S. retaliation. Beijing and Moscow have urged the United States to suspend its joint military exercises with South Korea in exchange for a North Korea nuclear freeze, but the U.S. representative to the United Nations dismissed the proposal as insulting.